May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, the God who gives a true Sabbath. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. I was telling Nancy there was plenty of information in this week's lesson, so I surely should be able to write a sermon pretty easily, but as it wound up, this was a little more difficult than I thought. Until I got going, and I did my research, I did some praying, and I did a little looking around for some examples about the topic of Sabbath today, and I saw this panel cartoon that had two men speak, and the first one says, my grandfather called it the Sabbath, my father called it Sunday, and I call it the weekend. And I like to look at the history, like 100 years ago today in the paper, and get an idea of what happened then. And you around this community, all the churches were, a lot of the church members were marching to close down all the theaters and anything else that had anything to do with fun on Sunday, because it was considered to them, the end of the world, I guess, if Sabbath wasn't held that way. Yeah. I know nowadays, many things are available for people to do on a Sabbath. It's kind of your choice, and I think what we kind of learned from the lessons today is kind of pick and choose what you might do on a Sabbath, and you still may be okay with your Sabbath rest. And it may seem like the Sabbath observance, the lack of the Sabbath observance, there's a recent phenomenon, but it isn't. Really, man and God have been at odds to what entails the fourth commandment since the Jewish community had it introduced several millenniums ago. The Christian church embraced the commandments received by Moses, including the obligation to honor Sabbath. And they moved the day up to Sunday because that was the day of Christ's resurrection, the day of the week. Now, as a result, there was not only one religion that was having trouble obeying the Sabbath, then you almost had two major religions that have trouble with trying to figure out how to comply with God's expectations. God kind of called them commandments and not suggestions. But it doesn't make any difference. People still kind of argue with him about that point. The reading from Isaiah, matter of fact, was about the people. They were saying, God, what else you want us to do? We're fasting here, we're praying to have things go better for us, and they're not going better for us. That was the idea. And it was a time when they were coming home from Babylon. They had been exiled there for quite a while, several generations anyway. But when Cyrus the Great came along, he freed the Jews that were in Babylon and said, you go back to your home country. And arriving back, well, they're like anyone else. They picked up a lot of bad habits in those number of years and traditions. And a lot of that stuff abhorred God. They almost seemed more distant to Judaism than the crowd that God had sent packing earlier in the first place. Of their many shortcomings, Isaiah told them of God's displeasure with neglecting the poor and serving their own interests above all else. God thought they were especially guilty of self-serving interest by their lack of care for others on the Sabbath, using the labor of those who needed the rest day, but they were in no position to refuse. The people did not call the Sabbath a delight, a time to serve those with little or nothing. They didn't do that. And as a result, it really hurt the community. There was a lack of solidarity in the community, and that just resulted in more social injustice. Things don't really change all that much. Solidarity with God's ways and efforts to address social issues have even more resistance today. Even our own homes. Adam was talking about last week, the 3 against 5, 5 against 3. In churches, in countries throughout the world, we have a big deal with addressing social issues. Now, a major theological point for Christians is that Jesus freed us from the harshness of trying to obey the law, from which we all fall short. Now, as a Jew, Jesus did understand the importance of the law, but he was able to condense it down to its basic points. Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and likewise love your neighbor as yourself. Now, Jesus was accused of being a big Sabbath breaker. Not just once, several times. He's accused of being a Sabbath breaker. And today, in today's story, he gets the ire of the Jewish leadership for breaking the Sabbath by healing a woman who had been crippled for 18 years by a spirit. Provocative Jesus is confronted by indignant synagogue leader who implies healing is work and therefore forbidden on a Sabbath. Provocative Jesus does a little name calling in this episode in order to show that people don't understand one of the purposes of Sabbath is to restore all those who are separated from community. The stooped woman had dragged herself out on the Sabbath to be at the synagogue as Jewish tradition demanded. Do you think that might just been a little tough on her to get around to go to the synagogue that day? And do you think that she was embraced by her community and had accommodations all set up for disability? No. Notice that the woman does not approach Jesus. She knows what's going on. She makes no request of Jesus, and she reveals no faith in Jesus. Once healed, she praises God. Well, she might be an example of what you might call radical grace, this thing that we kind of all receive just by being with God, accepting God. She was set free from that bondage that she had long endured. In Jesus, we are also set free from legal bondage of Sabbath. But what are we really set free for? The Reverend Amy Reiter presents some ideas on this question. She writes, are we simply free to add 10 more hours to our work week? To work every day so those who work for us never have a day during which they might get something done without worrying about what they have to do for us? Are we free to simply participate every day in consumer culture, making purchases, acquiring, accumulating? Is that what you're free to do on the Sabbath? She continues, so what does God intend for the Sabbath? If we are free from the law, for what are we free to do? Well, we are free to rest. We need it. We all need rest. Adults, children, executives, workers, bus drivers, students, teachers, prison officers, homemakers, everybody. And the rest is a social issue, because we need an economy in which people can make a living wage so that no one has to work every day of the week just to make ends meet. We all should be free to rest on the Sabbath. We are free to remember our dependency on God on the Sabbath. Sabbath reminds us that God is God, and we can stop trying to be God. We can rest, worshiping God, learn about God. We can be in all of God's hierarchy and not necessarily in competition with it. We can be free to admit that we do have dependency on God. On Sabbath, we are free to worship, to immerse ourselves in God's eternity, in a place and a time set aside, in an activity in which we produce nothing but praise, where we are valued, not because of what we make, or what we do, or what we earn, or what we deserve, or what we know, or what we contribute or achieve, but because we are created by God and loved by God. So we're free to worship. The woman cured by Jesus on that Sabbath probably experienced all these things I talked about in that and gained her freedom. She experienced rest from the physical stress of her deformity. She experienced rest from the physical stress of her deformity. She experienced dependency on God in the reminder that God alone has the power to bring healing. And she experienced true worship in a praise that issued forth from her lips for what God had done and not what she had accomplished. What about us? How shall we keep the Sabbath in our own day?